How do we stay in student ministry for the long haul? And what would it look like to be at a church for 10, 15, 20, or more years? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about with our guest on this episode of Student Ministry Connection. Welcome to Student Ministry Connection, a podcast for those who serve in student ministry and also want to connect with others and continue to grow. I'm your host, Steve Cullum, and in addition to being a youth pastor myself, I also serve as a missionary with National Network of Youth Ministries. And our guest today is one of my newest coworkers at NNYM. Jeff Glenn is a veteran youth pastor with over 30 years of experience. And recently, he resigned from a church that he served with for 26 years, a number that is almost unheard of in the student ministry world. So how did he do it? And how can we also go after that kind of longevity? We're going to talk about all of that in just a bit. As this episode is releasing in mid-October 2024, I'm heading out on the road for several student ministry conferences and retreats, and I hope to see you there. I'm going to be at the Download Youth Ministry First Decade Conference, the Leader Trek Refuel Retreat in Colorado Springs, a Colorado Youth Pastor Retreat also in Colorado Springs, the Pact Roundtable in Atlanta, Georgia, and the DYM 100 Roundtable back in California. I'll be speaking at some of the events and leading some groups at other events and simply in attendance supporting youth leaders at others. Again, if you are at any of these events, I would love to see you, so be sure to find me and say hello. Before we jump into today's conversation with Jeff Glenn, let's pause to thank the sponsor of this episode. Ministry can be complicated to navigate, especially when you're juggling multiple jobs, roles, or youth ministry gatherings. Student Ministry Connection believes that the best leaders are healthy leaders, leaders who are able to lead from a place of abundance rather than exhaustion. And that's why we believe in G-Shades Youth Ministry Curriculum. With the release of Season 6, G-Shades is your simple solution for a gospel-centered youth ministry. Season 6 includes a year's worth of volunteer training resources, parent training resources, outreach events, discipleship events, and even 2 camps. Their curriculum is laser-focused on helping students see themselves, God, and others through the lens of the gospel, and it shows up in every topic, series, and week. And you can amplify your reach with G-Shade's engaging video messages, whether it's sharing the videos with your digital audience, giving parents a full preview of the content beforehand, or sending them out the next day to catch students up who missed out. G-Shades allows you to extend your ministry's reach, and that's not to mention the benefits of your students hearing the gospel preached from different voices and perspectives. There are lots of great youth ministry curriculums out there, but G-Shades sets itself apart because of a strong focus on the gospel. I've been so impressed with Mike and his team as they've created an amazing gospel-centered curriculum. So head over to gshades.org to catch your first glimpse of G-Shades with a 4-week free trial. And when it's time to buy, you can use the offer code CONNECTION for 10% off their top-tier curriculum. G-Shades, seeing life through the lens of the gospel. You can find the link to G-Shades in our podcast show notes. Well, hey, Jeff, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Hey, Steve, it's great to be here, man. It's an honor and a joy to join you this afternoon.
Yeah, we've gotten a chance to work together a little bit here at National Network of Youth Ministries, and been cool to get to know you a little bit, but excited to get to know you even more on this episode. So, yeah, I would love to just start off with your testimony and your story, like, share what you want, but how you got into, ministry, but also feel free to go back in time a little bit and how you initially got connected with Jesus and church and all that stuff.
Sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's an awesome joy to be able to kind of share that experience of what God has done in my life. Yeah. So, starts a little bit way back. In my preteen years, I was attending a church that was a block away from my house. My older siblings were going to church and invited me to vacation Bible school. And it was a full week of Vacation Bible School. I learned the story of Jesus, and by the end of the week, I knew in my heart, in my head, as much as a 10-year-old, 9-year-old could understand, um, that I wanted Jesus in my life, and so I went and talked to the pastor. He counseled with me. We prayed together. I invited Christ into my life, and yeah, got baptized on Mother's Day, not long after that, and God began to do really cool work, and that kind of is a prelude to how I got called into ministry. So I feel like that God called me to ministry when I was 10,
Mm.
and not really fully knowing that. Of course, as a 10-year-old, there's only so much you know. But as I look
Yeah.
back in retrospect, I can see where God had his hand on me and he was calling me into ministry. So, yeah, let me tell you about that part of the story. Um, this was the end of my sixth grade year, and I was at a track and field event. It was really like field day at our school. Sixth grade was a part of elementary school, and so we were the upper boys and girls on campus, and
Mhm.
but it was a in into the school year spring kind of thing, and I was running a obstacle course around the school, and
Mm.
so I was coming toward the finish line. I was in first place, and I could see the finish line with my
Mhm.
eyes. I was booking it, running towards it, and I slipped and I fell. And
Oh, no.
my buddies ran right past me, but eventually I ended up getting up and I crossed the finish line. Came in third place. A little disappointed because I thought I was in first. But a couple of days, and then evolved into weeks after that. I had in my left ankle, I began to feel this incredible pain, and so ended up going to the doctor. Um, my physician, um, took a look at it. We did some X-rays. We thought it was a sprained ankle. It never got any better. So
Mm.
he sent me to a orthopedic doctor, and after a lot more X-rays, examination, different kinds of things, and appointments, found out I had a childhood hip disease called Perthes disease, and
Mm.
which was, I guess, sparked by that initial fall. Didn't know I had that until that fall happened, and and then that transpired into an incredible course of events. Um, the doctor had come to me. He was a exploratory surgeon, and gave me some options as a 10-year-old. Of course, my mom and dad were there, and uh, I could either have surgery and be in 6 months in a full body cast, um,
Mm.
or I could have surgery, be in traction, be in leg braces, and also crutches. And so, and that was the exploratory part.
Wow.
Yeah, a whole new surgery. I chose the latter, and I'm like, I do not want to be
Mm.
sitting up in a bed for 6 months in a body cast,
Yeah.
and tracking. And so, yeah, I was in the hospital for 28 days. That
Mm.
included my rehabilitation, and it really learning how to walk again in that situation. But while I was in the hospital, um, I think my heart was just soft to the Lord, and part of who God created me to be. But there was a 4-year-old boy on the wing of the hospital, that of the children's wing, and I could hear him screaming down the hall every day.
Mm.
It found out that rheumatoid arthritis as a
Mm.
4-year-old. My mom and his mom
Wow.
got me walking together, um, found out, this was 30 something plus. I mean, actually, this is longer than that, 40 something years ago. And, found out that my understanding, what we heard is that this little boy is probably going to die from this, um, just because of lack of treatments back in those days. And
Sure.
my heart went to him. It's just like my heart went out to him. And
Yeah.
so the interesting thing is that I'm the youngest of five siblings. Um, my older siblings had given me a ventriloquist dummy for Christmas that year. So I was learning to throw my voice and learning how to do ventriloquism. And they had brought it up to the hospital, and I wheeled myself down to this little boy's room and was kind of trying to make him feel better, and
Mhm.
figure out anything I could do with that puppet to make him smile or laugh or just kind of forget his pain. And I did. We sang songs together. I learned just the songs that I'd learned at church and different songs growing up, like you know the spaghetti song on top of spaghetti, the meatball rolling off the spaghetti,
Mhm.
and you are my sunshine. I mean, just different things I was singing to him, and we ended up, um, he ended up stopped crying. I mean, we started interfacing with each other, um, and it was cool. It was a cool moment of time, and
Yeah.
so I went back to my room after after so many days in the hospital. My mom was staying up there, but then I was got pretty accustomed and independent. And I told her, I said, "Mom, go home, sleep in your own bed." And um, so I was in my hospital room. I was in my room, and visiting hours were over. Um, and I heard a knock on my door, and this little boy's mom poked her head in, and she said, "Hey, Jeff, may I come in?" And I said, "Sure." So she walked over to my bedside and she grabbed my hand and she said, "Hey, I want to thank you for coming
Mm.
to sing to my little boy and to talk with him." And she said, "That's the first time I've seen him smile and laugh in a very
Mm.
long time." And
Wow.
she said, "Thank you for
Mm.
just doing that for him." And as quick as she came in that room, she had left, and
Mm.
I was sitting there by myself in the room, and during that whole time, as a preteen, um, I was struggling with my identity.
Mm.
My older brothers were all athletes, and the doctor had just informed me that I could not do any contact sports, and probably until I was 16. And so I was 11 years old, and so my identity was surrounded, with the idea of I was going to play sports, and
Yeah.
now it was like completely stripped away from me, and I'm like,
Wow.
God, I don't even know what I'm going to do, and so I started praying and asked God, God, what do you want me to, here I am, an 11-year-old. What do you want me to do? I can't play sports. What do you want?
Mm.
You know, and, but I went back to one of the things that the mom said to me, and she said, you really made a difference in my little boy's life.
Mm.
And that's all she said.
Mm.
And so it was from that moment, it was like, got it. I think, if you want me to, I want to make a difference in the lives of young people. And and I feel like after that prayer, that was a moment, I could swear to you as an audible voice to me, but God was speaking back to me and say,
Yeah.
Jeff, I want to use you. Um,
Mm.
and I didn't know much about youth ministry, or children's ministry, but that's when I feel like God called me into the
Wow.
ministry. Of course, um, God did a lot of work in my heart, in my life, throughout my middle school and high school years. But I always came back to that call. Um,
Mm.
during high school, I think I tried to fight it, and I was looking more towards making lots of money or being famous or whatever. But
Mhm.
God always stemmed me back to that call in the hospital room when I was 11
Mm.
years old, and
Wow.
I came back to that. So my sophomore year at the University of Georgia, I served as a summer missionary in Eureka, California for the
Okay.
summer. And I spent the summer there doing vacation Bible schools and youth camps um,
Mhm.
for an association of Baptist churches, and it was from that summer, God just really confirmed that call and
Mm.
said, yeah, this is what I want you to do. And so before I got home um, at the end of the summer, I received a phone call from a church in my hometown asking me if I would be their youth director while I was
Wow.
in college. And again, God just confirmed. I mean, I didn't even, I just prayed about it, and He put it in my lap. And so I took that as, okay, God, this is what you want me to do. And it was from that point on, as a sophomore in college, that you know I started serving in student ministry, and
Mm.
the rest is history. Yeah,
Wow. Wow. And and so just for our listeners, because we're gonna dive into the longevity in just a second, but how long so were you at that church? Is that the same church that you were at the whole time, or were you at a couple different churches?
yeah. That was a part time position as a student director. Um, 3 years while I was at the University of Georgia. I was attending classes and getting my degree, but served at the church. Then right after I got married and graduated from the University of Georgia, my wife and I served as US2 missionaries back in California, and we did youth
Mm.
evangelism for the California Baptist Convention for two
Okay.
years as missionaries, and
Mhm.
served there for 2 years. Had a great, incredible experience um, there. And then from there, went to seminary, served at a church part time while I was in seminary. Um, so I only served in two churches full time. Um,
Okay.
and so right after seminary, I was in a church for about 3 years here in Georgia. And then from that church, I moved to Middle Georgia, and I served at that church for 26 and a half years,
Wow.
and just resigned last May. Yeah,
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible. Yeah, I mean, as you know, that's not something we hear very often at
no,
all.
yeah, yeah,
Uh, wow. So before we get into, because I want to talk to you about like what are some things that led to longevity and all that stuff, because I think that's what many of us, or could I say most of us in student ministry, we long for that kind of ministry to make an impact in the community for that long. But before we get into that, what are some things that changed over the years? Like what did youth ministry look like, and encapsulated in these different seasons? Because I'm sure in the course of 26 years at one church, I'm guessing you probably didn't do youth group the same way in year 26 that you did in year one. So
sure.
what are some things that you noticed that changed over those years?
Yeah, great, great question. So Yeah, back in the early '90s when I started at Shirley Hills, that was the church that I just resigned from. Um, yeah, actually, this was the late '90s, and so the difference is that that I really see is just the way we do. Number one, the way we do church,
Mm,
and back in the '80s and '90s and early 2000s. There was this expectation, and this is kind of the way I kind of explain it. Back then, it seemed like the church was the hub in the community.
mm,
In 2024, I feel like the school is the hub of the
mm,
community. And I think that's the big shift that I've noticed. Of course, a lot of that has to do with the fact that we live more in a post-Christian society now than we did 20, 30, 40 years ago. But so the early 80s, I mean, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, um, you know, church student ministry full time looked like you were there Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Monday nights, Wednesday nights. You did stuff on the weekends, but pretty much all day on Sunday.
yeah.
You were, I was present. And interesting when I look back, I hear different people talking about that. But for me, I never saw it as, man, this is a lot of work, or this is taking up a lot of my time, or this is, we're just consumed by this. It, it just was what it was. And you did what you did. And I felt like you had a whole lot more time
Mm,
with the students than you
yeah.
do today. And that's probably one of the biggest differences is now you're fighting and vying for their time. And back then, we you had more time with them and were able to pour more into them
Mm,
um, than I do today. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. That totally makes sense. Yeah. Even from my time, as a high school student in youth group to yeah, 2024, I've seen a lot of that as well. Yeah, I used to spend a lot more time with students, and now it's like, okay, outside of youth group, like, when can I hang out with them? I go to their games and
Right.
stuff like that, but man, it's hard to pin them down. And they're like 14, 15, 16 years old. Like their
Yeah.
life is already so busy and their families' lives are so busy and trying to even, arrange a dinner time to, have dinner with their family and connect more with them and everything is so difficult nowadays. How did you how did you combat that, I guess? So as you saw that change, what had to change in your ministry to still make sure you were impacting those students, even
Mm.
though, their capacity, your capacity, whatever was changing?
Yeah. I think that, for me, I had to be more intentional. Back then, it was more an acceptance that, hey, we're going to be at church, and and some of that, to be honest with you, some of that um, was unhealthy,
Mm,
but at the same time, some of that was very healthy. It was finding that balance. Families needing to find that balance, but obviously over the years, the idea of simple church and
mhm,
and being more strategic, which all of that has been very good. Those are good things. Um, so, in the process of how things have changed over time, I realized I needed to be a little bit more, well, actually, a whole lot more intentional. Instead of them coming to me, I had to go to them, and I had to figure
mm,
out ways to go to them, and ways to develop relationships with them. And it's like you said, I feel like for me in the past, it was much easier to get on the school campus, and I could go eat lunch with them. to
Yep. Yep.
today, it's much harder to get on the school campus and go eat lunch with them. Um, but it's more, um, you know, figuring out ways to talk with the parents as well as the students, and maybe taking them out to breakfast before school started, or going and grabbing a soda after school, or being very intentional about showing up at their games. Whether that, a ball game, soccer game,
Mhm.
volleyball game, whatever. Um, and just realizing that, hey, this is and almost like you said, well, very much like you said, you also don't want to take away from kids being with their families.
Yep.
And you want to make sure they have time with their families. Um, so being very strategic and more intentional, but also, as time progressed, the smartphone, texting, and social media really became a way that I connected with the kids,
Mm.
and through, just texting them and checking on them, and I still do that. I meet with a young adult men's group, and the main way that we communicate throughout the week is through texting, and
Hmm.
and then we try to, of course, we try to meet up in person when we can, but they're
Sure.
extremely busy. But
Yeah.
yeah,
That's cool. Yeah, and I've noticed like I think the younger generations we're seeing them I I think appreciate the regular text communication and reaching out and talking like yes, it doesn't take the place of in-person communication and actually being with someone, but they really do appreciate it. It's not like an afterthought, like, oh man, my youth leader only texts me every once in a while or whatever. No, it's like, no, he texts me. I'm excited to get those texts. I'm excited to keep that conversation going. And he reaches out to me on my terms and in my where how I prefer it. And so yeah, I think that's a cool thing. Of course, we have to. I'm sure you saw over the years as well all the different safety protocols and everything that's
yeah,
changed over the years. To we need to be careful, like more than ever. We need to be careful, but
right,
not to necessarily ignore those the way technology and other things are changing in order to stay in contact.
right, yeah, for sure.
So let's talk longevity. What are 26 years at one church? That's like I said, it's almost unheard of. My youth pastor was a huge example to me. I've had him on the podcast before. He has since passed.
Well,
But but I love like I think he was somewhere around 35 years or something like that at
well,
our home my
well,
home church, which was just crazy. And so if we're all longing to have that kind of impact over time, to see generations upon generations, I'm sure you probably saw kids of your early youth group kids and all that stuff happen. That's amazing to experience. What led to that? Like, how did you get to be a youth pastor at a church for 26 years?
yeah, man. For initially, right off the bat, I would say, dude, man, you look back and it's like, wow, 26 years passed, and it seems like yesterday. And so, in some ways, I don't know that we ever, well, none of us ever know for sure how long we're going to actually be in a church. And like you said, we all agree, we have that desire, to stay, as long as we possibly can. So, but honestly, I would, by the grace of God, I would say that. I know that's the churchy answer, but it's true. And
Sure.
but I would also say that, you know, one of the things for me is I've never felt a call, or I'd never felt a call to be a lead pastor. And um, on the flip side of that, I've never told God, that I would not be a lead pastor. And I just, I just left it as it was, and I trusted in the call that he had placed upon my life, in working with students. But you know, I would say the biggest, biggest aspect to that longevity is going back to my call, and
Mm,
I and that has been the foundation and the root of of everything. Um, now could that call to ministry change? I was, yes. The answer to that is yes. God could have, transitioned me into any position that He wanted me to transition into, but I was very confident and secure in the fact that I knew that number one, I loved students and I was passionate and still
mm,
am passionate about working with students. Man, my heart goes out to them. I love them, and it's from that passion and from that call that, I think I've remained steadfast in, what he's called me to do. And,
mm,
and the other thing is that, I think uh, in thinking about that question, and a lot of people have asked me that over and over, and,
mhm,
I would go back to, um, back in the early 2000s. This goes back to a mutual kind of colleague of ours through the National Network of Youth Ministries through Barry St. Clair,
mm,
who was um, a a pivotal partner, um, who helped create the National Network of Youth Ministries. But
mhm,
early in the 2000s, I went to a retreat that he had, and he called them advance instead of retreat. And it was all about vision of ministry and um, teaching student pastors how to have like a vision for ministry
mm,
and how to be strategic with that vision and how to like have a life purpose and live that life purpose out for the glory of God. And but it was from that advance retreat that I went to, but also in here and learning, okay, God has placed this call upon my life and this vision of ministry upon my life. And so I've kind of stood upon that vision,
mm,
and that has just been the dream. And so the third thing I would say is there's been a book that's been pretty instrumental in helping me to stay where God has planted me. And that book I've got it right here, but it's called The Heart of a Great Pastor. Um,
mm,
and it's by H.B. London and Neil Wiseman. And it was put out by Focus on the Family years and years ago, but it is a classic and great book. And here's the tagline: How to Grow Strong and Thrive Wherever God Has Planted You.
mm,
And even though that was a book it was mainly a book for lead pastors, but
sure.
I picked it up as a youth pastor, and I started reading it, and
Mm,
it was life changing. And
mm,
it was from that book, I've learned that, I use the tagline of bloom where you're planted.
mm,
God called me to that church, and so uh, my wife and I made a decision that we were going to set roots here. We wanted our boys to grow up here in this church, and so we were determined. I was determined in my head, and in my desire was just to bloom where I was planted. And
mm,
so, of course, um, in the process of years, you can always look over the fence and see that the grass is greener somewhere else.
sure.
But sometimes that grass is greener for other reasons than just it being watered well.
Hmm.
There could be a lot of manure that's over there, making that green. And so, uh,
Yep.
with
And that manure is under the surface where you don't quite see it. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. And so I've learned to, man, just to keep my focus,
Mm,
and not let the minor things deter me from the call that God has put on my life to those
mm,
young people.
mm,
Um, so my call to those young people became greater than any of the little bitty things that Satan can
mm,
use to throw at us to become distractions.
mm.
And you and I know that happens all the
Yeah.
time. And um,
Yeah.
and I know it's not as clear and cut and dry as just me saying it with the words of my mouth. Um,
Hmm.
it's not it hasn't always been easy. Um,
Sure.
but I was um, I was determined, but only because I felt like that's what God called me
Mm,
to do. And so before, when you do that over and over and over, um, before you know it, 26 years have passed, and you've been able to see, um, see the youth grow up, and now I have the youth of my youth,
yeah.
in the youth group, so which is pretty cool.
That is really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Man. So what I heard was initiative and determination that's rooted in a call. That's
Yes.
what, like, that driving force that's getting you there. And our colleague, mentor of mine, Doug Fields, I think a lot of times says that we are all interim at some level. Like at
Um,
some point, we are going to move on. We are not going to be the youth pastor of a specific
right.
church forever and ever and ever. And some point, either we die, we pass on, or we move on to another church, we move on to another ministry. At some point, that's going to happen. But at the same time, don't, not to like have that in your driving force in your head, to have that like I'm planning on staying here as long as I
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
It's all in God's hands, but I'm planning on staying. And I think balancing those two thoughts in your head is some mental gymnastics probably sometimes.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It is. It for sure. And like I said, there are moments when it has not been easy. And but you know, you also find out that if you stick with it long enough, those moments pass. And I know,
Mhm.
and the big things, all of a sudden in retrospect, you realize were really small things. But we made them bigger than what they were. And so whatever Satan wants to throw at us to kind of deceive us or plant the seed that, hey, you just need to get out of here and go somewhere else. Um, Oftentimes I've found out that if you stay long enough, and if you don't react um, on a notion, but you respond by just waiting it out. Um, Most of the time, I know that that's not always um, the same in every church with every youth pastor, um, but most of the time, that's it's going to pass, and you're like, you can take a deep breath, and it's like, you know, that wasn't as bad as I made it up to be in my head.
Yeah.
Satan made it worse.
He tends to do that for sure. Builds things up in our heads. Absolutely. So I know there's the our community of youth leaders that are listening, and maybe, like I said, I think I believe that the vast majority of youth leaders out there do want to have longevity. But there's also all these other outside factors. I mean, leadership changes and people that don't like your vision, and all these different things. There's these things that lead to not being able to stay at a church for 26 years.
Sure.
So I'm thinking of those people that are like, maybe they're struggling, they have that desire, they want to reach levels that you've reached and things like that. What other encouragements would you provide youth leaders who are maybe have that desire, but are thinking about all those thoughts that Satan's putting in their heads. But what about this and what about that?
Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely have to come back and say, Steve, that um, it comes back to your connection with the Lord. And I think you have to go back to Him, that He becomes the default of all that we do and all that we set out to do, and that call becomes the default. The call to ministry, um, period. You know,
Mm,
that can look different, and that's okay. It's okay that that looks different. One of my biggest concern is there are a lot of youth pastors that I'm not really sure that they understand their call, nor have they cultivated it.
mm,
And I think when you don't have a secure call to ministry, then it's really easy to walk away from something.
yeah.
But if you have that call and you trust in it and you believe in it as much as you believe in your faith in Jesus Christ, and all that He did on the cross for you, um, as well as the resurrection and giving you this life to live. If you don't have that faith in that call, then you're um, man, you're missing out. I mean, that's the default that I feel
Mm,
like I always come back to. And so, um, my favorite verse is comes from John chapter 15. It's Jesus talking to the disciples um, during the Last Supper. He's about to die.
yeah.
The most important words are coming out of his mouth. He's serving
Mhm.
those disciples, and he talks about abiding. And I it's that that chapter and those verses are my default. I go back to that, and and I recognize number one, John 15:5, I'm the vine, you're the branches, he who abides in me, and I in him. Um, you know, you will bear much fruit, but without me, you could do nothing. And so the default is that I am not God. I'm not the vine. I'm just a branch. And but I have to remain connected to the vine in order to bear the fruit that God wants me to bear. And but if I don't remain connected to Him, if He's not my default, if that call to abide in the vine is not my default, then I'm not going to bear fruit. And you know um, the challenge and the warning there by Jesus is that you you're nothing. You're nothing without me. And so for me, that's what I always default to. Um,
Mm,
that Jesus is the vine. I just need to be a branch and let His Holy Spirit power be the supernatural nutrients that flow from Him to me, so that I can bear fruit for His glory. And yeah, um, for me, that's um, how I think remain steadfast, and I still to this day, even through the support raising and seeking God's will about what He wants me to do next in this position with NMYM. It always defaults back to that whole thing of
yeah.
just me being a branch. Lord, just help me to
Mm,
be a branch that's connected to you, and you use me to bring about fruit for your glory.
mm. That's so good. Thanks, Jeff. I think we all need to hear that and be reminded of that. So let's transition into this new role. So now we get to be coworkers, and we work with NNYM together. What led you to finally step out of a church for 26 years and step into this role with us and support other youth leaders?
Yeah, well, I would. a couple of years ago, my wife and we were walking the neighborhood. So I think this was a kind of a transition time for us because our youngest son had just graduated from college. We were true empty nesters at that point because he was we cut him off on from everything. No more insurance, no more nothing. So he went off and embarked on his own, and so we were like, wow, we kicked him out of the nest, and now the nest is empty. And so
Yeah.
we were walking around the neighborhood, and she just out of the blue asked me. She said, "Is there a next season for us?" And
Mm.
and I was like, man, if and I told her, I said, hey, if I could dream up the best job, it would be to pour into other youth pastors and kind of share with them the wisdom that God has, given me over the years through my experience of doing student ministry, 35 plus years. And that would be awesome. That'd be pretty awesome if I could do that. But I said these words. I said, but I don't know if there's a job out there like that. And so I laugh. We both laugh now because a few
Yeah.
months after that, um, I had attended uh, the PAC conference
Hmm.
here in Georgia, and PAC stands for Prayer Accountability, Care, and Training, and it is specifically for uh, tenured youth pastors to pour into younger youth pastors, and just kind of mentor and coach them, and learning how to do that. And so I had been doing that. Um, I'm the local network leader of our local network here, and I've been doing that for over 15 years. And it's been a side kind of job that went along with my student ministry position that I
Hmm.
thoroughly enjoyed. And it was really cool as I went from the rookie to the veteran, um, over 26 years.
Yeah.
And it was cool, having younger youth guys, come to me and say, hey, what do I do blank? How do I do blank? And
Hmm.
me just, um, having a cool and awesome experience of just kind of pouring into them. And so at that PAC conference is where I met. Well, Mark and I knew each other before then because I was a part of the National Network of Youth Ministries as a um, as a network coach,
Hmm.
coordinator for my local network. And but Mark had asked me at that conference. He said, "Hey, would you consider being the Georgia coordinator for
Yeah.
NNYM?" And I'm like, well, tell me a little more about this. And so it was everything that the same words that came out of my mouth when I was talking to my wife were the words that Mark was sharing with me, which I kind of already knew. I knew what Mark did. And, but I didn't know the position was available. I didn't, I wasn't really aware. And he said, what about you becoming my Georgia coordinator? And I'm like, wow, okay, God. Um, "Hey, are you in this?" And so we came home, and I told Mark, let me pray about it. We prayed over a year about that position, and felt like God had aligned our hearts, and was working things out at our church as well to align the idea of me leaving. And um, and yeah, man, the rest is history. And
Yeah.
so stepped out of the boat uh, at the end of May and into this position. And man, I'm excited.
Yeah. Yeah. We're excited to have you on the team for sure. And And Mark Shaner, for anybody that's listening, that's the Mark we're talking about. He's our Southeast coordinator, so oversees those states in the Southeast part of the United States. And yeah, just thrilled. And so your responsibilities are similar to mine, as I'm the Colorado state coordinator. You're the Georgia state coordinator. So primarily, you're working with youth pastors networks within the state of Georgia. So if
Yes.
anybody that is in Georgia and saying, I want to be connected, I want to make sure that I'm not doing ministry alone, make sure you reach out to Jeff
Yeah.
as well. Um, anything else that you would say for about your responsibilities? Anything you're really excited about doing beyond coordinating networks and stuff?
Yeah. I would just say, I know, I think you may have been a part of the lift calls that we talked
Hmm, yeah,
several weeks ago.
yeah,
But
really
like we're
exciting.
noticing in our area with Christian teachers, man, they're struggling as much as youth pastors are,
Yeah,
um, and just need encouragement and need uh, the someone to come alongside them and be that Aaron and her to hold up the hands of Moses and
yeah,
just come alongside them and support them and it's so that they can stay in the fight. Um, School teachers, have a whole lot more time with students than even youth pastors. And
yep,
and so if you have a Christian school teacher that is using that platform as a basis to be able to share the love of Jesus with students, be in the hands and feet and the mouthpiece of Jesus inside the school system to those students. Um, then yeah, we need to support those. So, you know, that's one thing along with everything else that we get to do that has just resonated in our hearts because we see the dire need of it here in our area. And so we want
yeah,
to come alongside Christian school teachers and say, hey,
mm,
we are here for you. We love you. We want to support you. We want to come alongside you and hold you up and, help you to stay in it for the long haul. Um, because they are Christian missionaries, on that mission field of a campus. And,
mhm,
I feel like as youth pastors, we're like an extension. I mean, obviously we're an extension of the church, but we get to be an extension of those teachers and administrators going into their school campuses.
mm,
And so I guess you asking that question, that's probably the one thing that pops in my head that
yeah,
over the next year we're looking forward to figuring out how we can have a lift dinner for some
mm.
Christian teachers and start building them up and surrounding them and loving them and being there for them. So yeah.
Yeah, that is exciting. Yeah, I had no idea when I asked that question the other day. That what really just spurred from our team conversation at
Yeah.
our gathering this May. Just like, hey, we want to start focusing more on Christian teachers. I was like, that's a really cool idea. I like that idea a lot. And so I took it to a couple teachers in our local community and said, hey, how do you feel? Like, are you supported? What can we do as a church? What can we do as NNYM to come alongside you? One thing led to another, and then we ask a question, everybody's getting excited, and we're like, let's go. Like it was
Yeah.
really cool to just see God work in all of that and to hear more about the lift events. Yeah, it gets me really excited too. So I'm right there with you
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. It's very, very
uh
cool.
so so similar to me, Jeff, people are we were raising funds for our ministry. You get to be back in a missionary role. So all these years later, God's put you back as a missionary again. So both of us, of
Yeah.
course, are raising
Full
funds for our
circle, man.
ministry. So if you'd like to support either of us in doing that, that'd be great. But what are the other ways that people can connect with you, especially if we have youth leaders that are in Georgia? They're like, man, this sounds great. I need to get to know Jeff. I want to follow up on something he's talked about. Wants to, they want you to take him out for coffee or something like that. What's the best way to connect with you?
Sure. Yeah. The best way is just to go through the NNYM website, connect there, especially if you're a youth pastor, youth leader, or a network coordinator. You can connect through the NMYM website. But my email address is jglenn, Glenn, jglenn at NMYM. Um, and that's the best way to connect with me. You can look me up on Facebook, um, connect with me there as well. So
Cool. Well, thanks again. And yeah, we'll have all those links in our show notes as well that people can just click right there and get connected with you even more. So, Jeff, it's so awesome to have you on our team and to be able to serve alongside you. And thank you so much for being on the podcast today and sharing all of your wisdom and expertise that you've gained over the years and all the things that God's been able to do through you. And thank you so much for, now pouring into other youth leaders and helping raising up the next generation of youth leaders that are going to go out and change the world. So thank you again, and God bless your ministry.
Hey, thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. What an honor.
Thanks so much for tuning into this episode. If you connected with what Jeff talked about, please reach out to him at the links in the show notes. But also, please consider subscribing on your favorite podcast app and sharing this with others. Jeff and I continued talking after we finished recording, and we talked about the mental health stuff that's also changed over the years in student ministry, not only with students, but also with youth pastors. Not only are they dealing with churches and family and calling balance that we talked about, but now many of them are also struggling with crippling anxiety. Whether it was always there or not, what we do know is that this is a real issue in youth pastors today. So that's one of the main reasons that we feel called to work with National Network of Youth Ministries. And if you'd like to support either of us in prayer or financial support, we would be so grateful. Just go to nnym.org, or you can follow the link in the podcast show notes. Also, thanks again to G Shades for sponsoring this episode. If you are looking for a solid gospel-centered curriculum, check out gshades.org and use that promo code CONNECTION to save 10% off your order. We'll be back in a couple weeks with our next episode, but until then, be sure to stay connected, and may God bless your ministry.